A Palestinian prisoner, his name is Khader Adnan, just died this morning. He was 45 years old, and he was on his 86th day of hunger strike. So basically, he had not eaten for 3 months. And the reason that he refused to eat was that he was protesting his administrative detention. And that is basically when the Israelis take Palestinians, they detain them. They're not given any charge. And if they are charged, it's secret. So if you're under administrative detention, you're not allowed to even know why you are in prison. Your lawyer is not even allowed to know why you're in prison. They can detain you for 6 months at a time and renew it indefinitely, forever. So you have people who've literally been in prison for years and they don't know why, and he is one of them. And this is a very, very significant moment, and I'm going to say it straight up to you. Khader Adnan is basically the Bobby Sands of Palestine. Make no mistake about it, because he is the guy who kind of, there were hunger strikes before in the past. There have been hunger strikes going on since the 1970s, in protest to Israel's administrative detention. But in the modern era, so let's say post Second Intifada, he's really the one who's kind of, made it popular again, shall we say, among prisoners. And he's the first Palestinian prisoner to die of hunger strike since 1992. So you realize how significant this is. He's going to receive less favorable coverage in the Western media because they say, he was part of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is, which is recognized as a terrorist group by Israel and some other countries. What does that have to do with, keeping him in detention for years without charge or trial? I call that terrorism. Yeah, I call that terrorism. I think most of the world would agree that's terrorism. So in any case, Khader Adnan, he was born in Jenin, of course, Jenin refugee camp, which is in the West Bank. And again, you think of this concept that you have people who are refugees inside their own country. They're not going to another country to seek refuge. They've been made and turned into refugees in their own country. Khader Adnan, he has a bachelor's degree in mathematics. He had a master's degree in economics, and he was also a baker, right? I told you he just passed away at 45 years old. He had 9 children. And, his political career really began with joining Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Okay, so this is a resistance faction, a Palestinian faction in the web of them. And I something that I was trying to get across to people is that in recent years, you're seeing less and less, and especially today, less and less of a distinction between these groups, because they've managed to unite as one front. So we don't talk anymore about resistance against Israel or resistance against America or whoever who's in the Middle East as, this is from Hezbollah, that's from Hamas, this is from PIJ. No one talks in these terms anymore, at least not in outside the Western media where you get actual news. So the fact that he was in PIJ or whether he was in Hamas, it literally makes no difference, right? They were hunting this guy, and the Palestinian prime minister called his death an assassination, and I agree. They were hunting this guy just for resisting Israel. That's the whole point of it, okay? That's the whole point. And the fact that he's never been convicted of a crime, I mean, this is ridiculous. This is insanity. He was arrested 12 times, right? And spent about 8 years in total in jail. 8 years in prison. Doesn't know why. And he's done 5 hunger strikes since 2004. And just to elaborate a bit more on you, of course, they didn't really mention this in the Western press. His first hunger strike was with a group of detainees in 2004, 2005. It was something that lasted about 25 days. Okay, so his first hunger strike. Then he did another hunger strike in 2011, 2012. What made him really famous back then and really popular in Palestine, because he went on a hunger strike for 66 days. 66 days, okay? That's his second hunger strike. The third hunger strike he did in 2015, and that was 58 days. And then in 2018, he did 54 days of hunger strike. 2021, his hunger strike was 25 days long, and then they released him 5 days later because he managed to get the Israelis to release him. And this hunger strike, which is his sixth hunger strike, is what killed him at 86 days of no food. So you can see he's done this multiple times, and most of them were for 2 months at a time. Can you imagine not eating for 2 months at a time? This is one of the purest and whole forms of political activism. His refusal to eat is him taking back the reins on the situation. More frequently, the Israelis are giving in to their demands when they go on hunger strike. The problem is, though, that they usually, and keep in mind, they're usually about to die at this point. That's how malnourished they are, okay? I'm not just talking about Khader Adnan, I'm talking in general. This is intentional medical negligence, okay? Intentional medical negligence. They refuse to treat them. Some hospitals refuse to admit them. This is a war crime in and of itself, because an occupying power, and Jesus Christ, man, these laws were written way before you and I were born. They go back 100 years, these laws. If you're an occupying power, you have to take care of your prisoners. De facto, by being in charge, they must take care of the civilians and the prisoners. And another war crime in all of this is that they're treating civilians as if they were in a tribunal, in a military tribunal, or being court-martialed or something, which is ridiculous. If an Israeli is charged with a crime in Israel, he will be taken in front of a civilian court, a civil court. But if a Palestinian is accused of the exact same crime, they will take that Palestinian in front of a military court, a military tribunal. This is a war crime. You are not allowed to try civilians as military members of the armed forces or the military. But that's exactly what they do to you when you're detained under administrative detention. So it's this whole issue is like a series of war crimes. I literally just yesterday I wrote a thread about this guy. Yesterday, I said, can you imagine going to jail without even being told why? And every 6 months your detention is renewed. And when you're released from prison, they bring you back in and out and back in and out over and over. This is really evil. And so what happened after they discovered him dead and unresponsive in his cell today, the Palestinians fired rockets out of Gaza. Remember, this guy is from PIJ and he's born in the West Bank. But you're seeing rocket fire from Gaza, from Gaza. You see again, this is a united front. Because in the past, you wouldn't have had that happening. Now you have this happening. When there's an injustice in Jerusalem, Gaza will fire. When there's an injustice in the West Bank, Gaza will fire. Syria will fire. Lebanon will fire. In Al Jazeera, they say that an umbrella group of armed Palestinian factions, including Hamas and Islamic Jihad, claimed responsibility for rocket barrages toward Israel. Then in response, the Israelis fired artillery shells on several areas in the eastern parts of Gaza and Khan Yunis. And then the Palestinians went on general strike. Everybody. General strike in the West Bank. Just because of this outrage of him dying in Israeli custody, not being given medical attention, being imprisoned in the first place. But Netanyahu, of course, he scurries off to meet security officials and assess the situation, meaning he's scared shitless. Maybe you should have scurried off and held a meeting with your security officials to release the guy before he dies. This is absolutely a form of assassination. What's the difference? Because if you kill this guy with a gun, or whether you put him in prison and let him rot in there until he literally dies, in and out of prison, it's the same thing, right? If you're Israel, it's the same thing for you. I'll read you this quote. This is magically, apparently it was actually in The Guardian. This doctor, Lina Qadam Hassan, the chair of Physicians for Human Rights Israel. She visited Adnan on the 23rd of April, and she said that, quote, his cognitive function was good enough to talk to me, but he was very weak, losing consciousness regularly. He was clearly dying. He said he wanted to live. It doesn't matter what medical colleagues thought about him or that he refused help. Their job is to save lives. The guidelines for dealing with hunger strikers are clear. He should have been taken to hospital after day 45. You see that she's saying he refused help. This is out of principle, okay? The hunger strikers always say we refuse food and we refuse any help. If they force feed them or stick a needle in their arm or whatever it is and nourish them just so they're breathing, it defies the whole point of their hunger strike. Okay? But she is saying, as a doctor, no matter where you are from, you have taken an oath, you have sworn an oath that you will seek to protect lives. And as I was telling you before, some clinics, some hospitals, they refuse to treat these guys at all. Right now, Israel is holding more than 1,000 Palestinian detainees in administrative detention. That's 1,000 people that have not been charged with a crime, that if they were charged, don't know what the charges are because it's classified, quote unquote. Their lawyers are not allowed to know what they've been charged with, their families, no one, literally no one. It's a mystery. It's a mystery. You know, at least when people are given a prison sentence in most countries, and even if it's wrong, right? Because in their cases, they're basically punishing these guys for resisting Israeli occupation, right? The entire planet agrees that Jerusalem is occupied, the West Bank is occupied, and Gaza is besieged. There's no question of this legally, morally, ethically, in any domain. And the UN has ratified this has said so much and passed UN Security Council resolutions. The whole world agrees on this. So these guys, under any law you like, they have the right to resist, whether they want to throw, cocktails, they want to throw stones, they want to fire rockets. I don't care. It's their business. But the Israelis are punishing them, right? They're punishing them and treating them as terrorists without even telling them. They were saying basically that since 1967, you've had 800,000 Palestinians going in and out of military courts, right? I mean, my brain cannot even grasp that. Right? How obscene that is, how absurd that is. The first time a Palestinian prisoner was killed in hunger strike, during their hunger strike, I say killed, not passed away, killed. This was in Asqalan prison in 1970. During this hunger strike, Abdel Qadir Abu al-Faham becomes the first Palestinian prisoner to die during a hunger strike. He dies as a result of force feeding by Israeli prison authorities who inserted a nasal feeding tube into his lungs instead of his stomach. This is, you murdered someone, man. I don't care what you call it. That's murder. You killed this person. Prisoners called for allowing stationery. Oh my God, they wanted pencils. They're such terrorists. Stationery and clothes from their families, as well as increasing break time in the prison yard, but their requests were not fulfilled. They murdered this guy for asking for pencils and clothes. I mean, what am I supposed to say? What are you supposed to say about this? For the last decades, this entire time, most of the demands from the prisoners are similar. They want more break time in the yard. They want clothes. They want parcels. They want, I don't know what it is, stationery, hygienic, Red Cross party. It doesn't matter, right? That's it. But the difference between them and Khader Adnan, who just died this morning, is that more and more recently, their protest demands, they're not asking for break time, they're not asking for pencils, they're asking for their whole detention to be revoked. They're saying, why are you keeping me in here? You're not charging me with anything, and when you have, you don't tell me what it is? I refuse you entirely, I reject you entirely, I'm not eating. And it's working. This is in 1980, so this is 10 years after the first killing. Rasim Halawi and Ali Ja'fari, they die as a result of force feeding during the hunger strike. They're not only refusing to give in to their demands, they're even killing them because they're too dumb. I don't want to say too dumb. They're very vindictive, I think, is what it is. They're purposely murdering them and then saying, oops, they died. Oops. Yeah, that's someone's life. And here, all they were asking for, they did not want to be crammed into small, dirty cells that lack air conditioning and only had small ventilation openings and receiving rotten food. That's all they wanted. They wanted air conditioning, not to be crammed into a cell with a dirty cell, and not to receive rotten food. And they kill you for that, for going on hunger strike. Wow. So, this is, again, this whole thing that Al Jazeera compiled is very good. It's actually from 2017. You should go look at it if you can, because they also tell you about the first women's hunger strike. And then they tell you here about, you had here 3,000 prisoners participating in a hunger strike, but unfortunately, they weren't able to extract any concessions from it. But the fact that they had gone on hunger strike played a part in basically, they contributed to the Intifada happening in the first place, okay? To the mass uprising. Intifada, that's what it means. You had 2 Intifadas in Palestine, okay? So the fact you had so many going on hunger strike, it was kind of, it galvanizes and mobilizes other people in parts of civil society to take part, okay? That's what they're saying here.